So Andrew, you just came off stage. How was your panel? What did you talk about? What did you enjoy?
It was great. I mean, it was on the net zero commute and the future of the net zero commute. And interestingly, I was seated between two automakers, and it made for an interesting conversation. But I think what it showed was how far shared micromobility has come, and that we were invited to the stage, and we were able to have a conversation around a service that could actually have an impact on the future of urban mobility. So it was a great conversation. I love being in the hot seat between those two automakers, but in many ways it felt very much at home because we're all talking about how to electrify transportation, how to do the commute in a net zero path, and that's what we're all about here at Lime.
Looking at the kind of changes that micromobility have driven in urban areas, what do you think is the most interesting impact that you've seen so far? What excites you the most about what you've achieved at Lime in the past couple of years?
Yeah, a few things. I mean, I think the most exciting thing is user adoption, that riders, and here in London you see it all the time where people are avid riders. It's one of our biggest markets around the globe. And I think the adoption is what's the most exciting thing. We now provide more than 6 trips every second around the globe. We provided more than 1 billion kilometers of trips since we started the business, and we're really just getting started. I think the other exciting thing is the number of people that are using Lime to prevent a car trip, a taxi trip, a ride-hail trip, which of course are much, much higher carbon emitting. And so since we started the business, 120 million car trips have been avoided by our riders. And again, that's something that we just want to further amplify. When
you're thinking about where you're going, what further shifts do you anticipate cities to undergo because of micromobility and this shift in how people are moving around? Yeah,
I would say there's 2 things. One is what cities are doing, and then second is like what are we doing as a business. I think for cities, we're seeing that cities are adopting micromobility in a more programmatic and formalized way, where they're allocating parking spaces, parking bays for more parking space for riders. They're providing protected bike lanes so riders can feel safer. They're allocating investment dollars to make those bike lanes more ubiquitous and more available so that they can make for a more seamless mode of transportation with people getting around on 2 wheels. And then for Lime's part, we're deeply focused on decarbonizing our own business. So we want to provide the service, and then we want our riders and our cities to know that we're doing what we can to make our business more sustainable. So things like sourcing low carbon aluminum for our vehicles, buying renewable energy for all of our warehouses and charging our batteries, doing things like repair and reuse practices. I was just up in our North London warehouse yesterday, seeing the massive undertaking of repairing the vehicles and then getting them back out on the street. So since we started the business, we actually set a net zero target for our carbon emissions, following a science-based target. We've reduced those emissions by 60% in the last 5 years on that path, and we just hope to continue that.
We just released a report last week for Nissan that spoke about young people's preferences, and they're really worried about cost.
Yep.
Do you think there's going to be a cost implication to users of Lime as you go through this decarbonization process? Where are the kind of costs of decarbonization rippling through to?
Yeah, I mean, well, we found that often the decarbonization efforts that we've done at the company have actually been very good for the bottom line as well. So, for example, in 2023, we grew the business by 32% of gross bookings, and we cut carbon absolute emissions by 16%. So we could actually drive the business up and drive carbon down at the same time. So we don't view those as not, as mutually exclusive. To your point around younger riders and sort of a younger cohort, over 80% of Londoners have, in the Gen Z category, in the Gen Z age group, have taken a Lime or another shared service as a commute option. So that tells us that there is a huge interest and a huge need for options to be able to get around for everyone's daily commute, especially among that younger cohort.
When you're thinking about the way Lime and the service interacts with commuting habits, do you see it primarily as replacing kind of individual cars, or are people also using it as a way to replace kind of current public transport. So instead of taking a tube or here in London, or taking the bus, or in New York taking the subway, how are they using it? How is it changing the kind of modes of transport people use?
Yeah, it's a great question. So globally, 1 out of every 5 of our trips are riders taking a Lime scooter or bike instead of taking a personal car, a taxi, or a ride-hail vehicle. So that's the big mode shift. We don't see as much mode shift from public transportation, mostly because those are often longer distances that people use. So what we see is being able to integrate with public transportation so that people can get to and from that public transportation, the train station, the bus, et cetera, in a more efficient way so that they can actually use it more often. We're in fact integrating with many of those public transportation services so that people can seamlessly go from point A to point B. And we're finding that in many ways, we've now also driven down the carbon emissions of our service such that we're actually lower carbon than on a per passenger kilometer or mile basis than most public buses. So, we view ourselves as complementary to public transportation, and we've integrated the service to do so.
What are some of the greatest barriers you face in continuing to scale the business within urban areas?
I think it's really a collaboration with cities to be able to allocate enough vehicles so that people have a bike or a scooter within 300 or 400 meters of any journey that they want to take. So it's proving to cities that we can operate in a way like we have done in London, like we've done in places like Paris or Washington, D.C. or Chicago or LA, where they see that the service is valuable, and then they start to say, well, wait a second, if you have a certain number of vehicles, what if we doubled that? Could we actually make the service more ubiquitous, drive up the sort of net zero commute, if you will, and be able to provide the service more, to be more available to riders?
Do you see a risk point as you continue expanding the access to your service across cities, that sort of the outer boroughs, if we were talking about New York, or Zone 5 if we're talking about London, that people who live out there won't necessarily have access to the service, so you might actually end up reinforcing some access to transportation disparities? Or are you cautiously optimistic?
I think we're optimistic that those boroughs or those zones that are less dense, that may not have as much access to shared micromobility, can in the future. I think as we reach scale and we have ridership, we're going to go where people go, and we want to go to those locations where people are going to use the service. And we definitely see the need for people to have access to that sort of last mile, last kilometer, mode of transportation, whether they're in a slightly, less dense area in a city or if they're right downtown.
What are you most excited about for the next 10 years?
I'm excited to see the future of the urban environment change. So cars sit idle 97% of their lives, and that takes up an enormous amount of space. If you think about the number of parking garages that are holding cars that are sitting idle, the number of parking spots on city streets where people are parking their cars and they're sitting idle, if you could get away from that and remove those cars, you suddenly have the ability to build things like housing where people live, work, and go to school. You have the ability to build things like protected bike lanes or eateries from restaurants out on those streets, on the sidewalk, which are otherwise used for parking. So parking really is in our best, highest use or most sustainable use of space in cities. And if we can get rid of those cars, we open up a whole lot more space for things that will make cities more livable.
Which, let's be honest, we all know there's housing crises, there's a desire for more pedestrianized streets, and it sounds like this might be a solution moving forward.
Absolutely. I think it can actually lead to a much more better urban environment, and one where commerce and sustainability and mobility and cost all can work hand in hand.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.